The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, the unprecedented precision of modern-day gerrymandering and how activists are fighting back. The argument for lowering the voting age to 16. Plus, Bill Press with Caroline Fredrickson on her new book, The Democracy Fix: How to Win the Fight for Fair Rules, Fair Courts, and Fair Elections. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. The fight to end gerrymandering is a fight for fair elections that represent the will of the people. Common Cause is at the forefront of the fight with a case in the Supreme Court that Dan Vicuna says could end partisan gerrymandering nationwide. And we say hello to Dan Vicuna, a National Redistricting Director for Common Cause. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Well, our pleasure to have you with us. So let's start in North Carolina. In March, U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in the potentially landmark case of Rucho versus Common Cause, challenging partisan gerrymandering of North Carolina's congressional districts. You told Talking Points Memo that the facts in this organization's case against North Carolina, quote, are about as egregious as the court will ever see, close quote. So tell us about the facts in this case and how you framed your arguments.
Of course. So in North Carolina, after the 2010 census, North Carolina, like most of the country, unfortunately, is a state where legislators are in charge of drawing both their own districts and the congressional map. And what the legislature drew in 2010 in the congressional map was a clear attempt to secure partisan advantage for the Republican Party and Republican candidates running for Congress there. In doing so, they packed black communities across the state into just a couple of districts, to give them overwhelming majorities, but ensure that they had little or no influence in the rest of the state. That was one of their ways of sort of keeping Democratic Party influence limited to as few districts as possible. In 2016, a federal court called them on it. It determined that the map was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Again, unfortunately, the state constitution provided no mechanism for somebody else to do a redraw of that map. So the North Carolina legislature got another shot at it, despite the fact that they drew an unconstitutional violation of the 14th Amendment equal protection. In drawing the new congressional map in 2016, instead of being chastened, in some way shamed by rebuked by a federal court, they stood up very loudly and proudly, said, this new map we're going to draw will not be a racial gerrymander. It will, in fact, be a partisan gerrymander. We're going to ensure that this is a map that produces 10 Republican districts and three Democratic districts, because we cannot figure out a way to make it 11 and 2. They put that into the written criteria for the drawing of the map. And proceeded to do that successfully. They redo the map in 2016, and in the election of 2016, in fact, the map produced 10 and 3. So Common Cause, along with the North Carolina Democratic Party and some individual voters from each of the congressional districts, said, well, this isn't right. We made the argument successfully at the trial court level that this was a violation of fundamental constitutional rights of North Carolina voters. The argument as we framed it was that it violates the First Amendment, that this is viewpoint discrimination, targeting Democratic voters because of their party preference, that it's a violation of 14th Amendment equal protection in that it's disparate treatment for Democratic voters in a way that offends the Constitution. And we had a couple of claims as well that we haven't seen in other gerrymandering lawsuits around the country to provisions of Article 1 of the Constitution, which limit the ability of states to their power over congressional districts and congressional elections. And we made the case that what the legislature did was to dictate outcomes in these congressional districts in a way that violated the Constitution. We were joined by a companion case that was in which the plaintiff was the League of Women Voters of North Carolina. All plaintiffs won on all counts. The trial court found it to be an unconstitutional partisan gerrymander. And, of course, the legislature appealed that to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that's what we heard oral arguments in. So we're awaiting a decision.
When do you expect to hear a ruling in the case, and are you optimistic?
So we're likely to hear a ruling sometime in late June. The Supreme Court can release a decision at any time. However, what tends to be the way that these things go is that the most controversial, difficult decisions, which we think, this is an issue that is likely to be difficult for the court to wrestle with. Those come at the end of the term. They kind of wait until the last minute to get their opinions together. So likely at the end of June. In terms of whether I'm optimistic, there was, of course, a lot of heartburn, about the fact that Justice Kennedy retired. He was seen as the target vote for this case. Some of the arguments were sort of tailored to him early on. But in addition to kind of the facts of the case being the most egregious the court could see just simply in the North Carolina case, there are some other factors as well. The fact that on the same day the court heard our case, they also heard a challenge to a Democratic gerrymander of a congressional district in Maryland, which was, although not quite as egregious in terms of vocalizing their goals, the Democrats, the legislature, and then Governor O'Malley, were very clear in that their attempt to draw the map in the way they did was to target a particular Republican incumbent. They did so successfully. And I think that really lays bare what is happening on this issue, that it's really not about party, it's about power, elected officials keeping it at any cost. And to be able to bring a Republican and Democratic gerrymander on the same day in front of the Supreme Court, especially one that leans right, I think is really a useful exercise. So, there's no way to tell for sure, but we absolutely put our best foot forward, I think, and both sets of plaintiffs in both cases really did.
Now, moving beyond North Carolina, Dan, your work at Common Cause reaches across the country. Why is this such a priority for Common Cause?
Well, so Common Cause is a democracy organization, voting rights organization, and I think there's no voting right more important than the very basic ability to hold elected officials accountable for their actions. And what gerrymandering does, with the use of increasingly sophisticated software and big data about sort of every aspect of our lives that now political operatives know, it's fairly easy to preordain the outcome of a set of districts for an entire decade, making it such that even the largest swings in public opinion make it incredibly difficult to change, the makeup of a congressional or state legislative delegation. And that just simply goes against the basic tenets of democracy, that we're allowed to hold our elected officials accountable and make our vote count. So it's something we've worked on for almost the entirety of our 50 years of existence, and we will continue to do so, no matter who's in charge.
We're talking with Dan Vicuna, National Redistricting Director for Common Cause here on the America's Democrats podcast. And Dan, we talk about gerrymandering in terms of both race and politics. How is the battle fought differently on these two issues, and how do the two intersect?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an intersection, and then sometimes they are used differently for different purposes. The way they intersect, I think, like I mentioned, the North Carolina case, and also in places like Virginia and Alabama, which in the last cycle had maps struck down for racial gerrymandering purposes. You see, when Republicans are in charge, you're likely to see a packing of black voters into as few districts as possible to, again, sort of give them overwhelming majorities, the ability to elect a candidate of their choice, of course, but with candidates winning 60, 70, 80% of the vote, but really limiting their ability to influence the rest of the state, really bleaching the surrounding districts and ensuring that white voters can dominate those districts, and in particular white Republican voters. However, we're sort of seeing I think a more sophisticated approach to manipulating districts, because the jurisprudence on racial gerrymandering is getting better, or it has gotten better in some cases over the last few years, where the Supreme Court has laid out some real ground rules that say you cannot make race the predominant factor in drawing districts, and that's mostly been used to strike down these situations where it's really being used for partisan purposes. Because the jurisprudence is very clear on racial gerrymandering, you'll see, North Carolina sort of alibi, right, to say, oh no, we're drawing these districts not for race purposes, but to ensure party dominance for us, for Republicans. That's why we're hoping to succeed in our partisan gerrymandering effort, because it's time to kind of eliminate that gerrymandering loophole where you can say, well, no, we're not going to do this for racial purposes, but we just want to screw over one party or the other. You'll also see racial gerrymandering, I think, in situations that don't necessarily involve partisan advantage, where you might have an incumbent, maybe an incumbent Democrat who is nervous about a primary challenge from a particular community, maybe a minority community, and so you'll see that community sort of carved out of the district in a way that's unnatural, or that denies that community an equal representation or ability to elect their candidate of choice. So they're both serious problems. We've seen some better movement on combating racial gerrymandering, and we want to make sure we do the same for partisan.
Mm-hmm. Now, Common Cause, I should point out, is very clear that gerrymandering is undemocratic, whether it comes from Republicans or Democrats. That said, is it fair to say that the practice benefits Republicans on average more than Democrats?
I think right now it does. That was not the case for, prior to 2010. There were decades and decades of Democratic dominance of drawing and manipulating districts. I think right now it does for a couple of reasons. In 2010, Republicans implemented Operation Red Map, a plan in which they poured millions of dollars of dark money into state legislative races around the country with the goal of flipping state houses and state senates to ensure control of the redistricting process. That, combined with the fact that 2010 broadly was a good year for Republicans, they really came together and allowed them to take control of a large number of legislative houses and governor seats in the year that districts would be drawn. So in most places, you have sort of trifecta control of government by Republicans, and they got to draw congressional and state legislative districts in a way that made it very difficult for Democrats to really win a majority of seats at any point in the decade. In some cases, it made it difficult for them to break through supermajority rule. So it happens. It just so happens that for that reason, Republicans have gotten more advantage. However, you do see in Maryland, where Democrats are in control, where the Supreme Court case was leading to the Supreme Court case that was argued on the same day as our case. In Illinois as well as a prime example of where Democrats are in charge. They are not hesitant to use that same power to discriminate against voters from the other party. So, we see it as a long-term problem of both making elected officials less accountable and also increasing cynicism in government, which is a real problem for keeping faith in the democracy.
Do you get the sense that it's worse now than it's been in our history?
Yeah, so with the arguments we've heard, and even in some of the the briefs from the other side in our Supreme Court case, and kind of in the public debate, is, well, this has been going on since the Governor Jerry was in Massachusetts. This is from 1812, and even before that, Patrick Henry tried to gerrymander James Madison out of his congressional district. But it's a different ballgame. This is not your grandfather's gerrymanders now. We've got incredibly sophisticated software, the ability to cross-reference a person's voting record with their club memberships and the magazines and newspapers they buy, and predict with near certainty, which way a voter in a sort of a community on a micro level is going to vote, making it very easy to sort of preordain the outcome for 10 years, and that's simply not the way democracy is supposed to work. And because of those sophisticated tools, it is indeed unprecedented in its precision.
Don't talk in front of your Alexa when you're discussing these things, I guess would be a wise rule, right?
I think that's a good approach to be careful.
Be careful where you're talking and how you're talking. And Dan, the Supreme Court, of course, isn't the only place where this battle's being fought. For example, there's the work being done by Eric Holder at the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. What is their strategy, and could it be successful?
Well, their strategy, I think, is twofold. It's an electoral strategy. They're going to try to be the counterpart to Operation Red Map, to target state legislative races and governor's races where the governor has a veto power over the redistricting maps. And then I think they have also more of a nonpartisan 501c3 strategy. They have a separate organization that I think will be more focused on litigation and reforms, sort of nonpartisan reforms. The likelihood of success, I think, in part depends on how you define success. I mean, if success is ultimately sort of winning control of more state legislative races and governor's races, and then simply turning around and doing the same thing their Republican counterparts would have done, manipulating those districts for partisan advantage. I think certainly partisans may see that as success. I don't think it's success for the Democratic Party, if not success, but not success for the democracy. To the extent that they focus their efforts on reforms that will reinstill faith in our institutions, a justifiable faith in them, by creating nonpartisan processes that have been sort of tried and tested in some other states around the country, then I think that will be success. So we'll see which way they go.
Before we let you go, how can our listeners stay up to date with the work that you're doing?
Well, if you go to commoncause.org/fairmaps, you can take a look at some of our state work, figure out how to get connected where you live. You can also sign up for the Gerrymander Gazette. That's about a monthly newsletter that kind of updates you on what's going on around the country on this fight. And in that newsletter, I take on the biggest challenge in writing, which is to make redistricting funny. So your listeners can see if I in any way succeed in that. So you can keep it up there.
Your second career in comedy, perhaps?
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay. Dan Vicuna, National Redistricting Director for Common Cause. Again, commoncause.org/fairmaps if you want to keep an eye on things. Dan, thank you so much for your time with us today on the America's Democrats podcast. We look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
Social Security measure. I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Coming up next, why lowering the voting age is about much more than elections. It's about survival. But first, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
The great thing about corporate giants is that they are such amazing business innovators. For example, in the category of wheel-spinning innovation, i.e. trying to change a corporation's course without actually changing anything, it's hard to top McDonald's. For several years, the fast food chain has been losing customers to younger chains with healthier, more stylish offerings. So, CEO Steve Easterbrook has tried to recoup the losses with PR tricks, such as calling the menu healthy and fresh. But a McNugget and fries are still what they are, so people have not bitten the PR bait. Now, though, eureka! He's hit on an innovation that'll surely cause hungry eaters to flock to the Golden Arches: artificial intelligence. Yes, exclaimed Steve the innovator, consumers need a robotic order taker to advise them on what to order, based on AI's ability to digest unlimited data about the weather, traffic, time of day, and what other people are ordering. Decision technology, it's called, and the CEO spent $300 million to buy these so-called thinking machines, which the maker claims will provide, quote, the rapid and scalable creation of highly targeted digital interactions. Now, what could be more inviting than that? Easterbrook adds excitedly that his innovative deployment of this artificial intelligence network will provide, quote, an even more personalized customer experience. Sure, Steve, nothing like more computers to add a warm personal touch to make a meal more appealing. This is Jim Hightower saying, far from helping customers, McDonald's snazzy new AI ordering system will be helping the corporation by silently compiling personal information on you, ranging from your movement patterns to your license plate number. McDonald's says it'll use the technology to make the most of the data collected.
This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. From climate change to guns to racial inequality, young people are fighting for their future. Mike Males says lowering the voting age will bring essential new voices to public life. And we say hello to Mike Males, an American sociologist who is senior researcher for the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice San Francisco and content director for youthfacts.org, the online information service on youth issues. He recently wrote a piece for Yes Magazine titled, A Lower Voting Age Isn't Just About Politics. Mike Males, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure to have you with us. Your article notes that millennials may prove more liberal than previous generations. What do we know from polling data?
Well, we don't have a lot of polling data on millennials, which I'm talking about younger millennials and Generation Z here, the population that's now, say, 12 to 18 years old. We don't know much about them because there's not a lot of polling done on them, which gives you an idea of how marginalized their views are. The best two we have are the American Freshman Survey done by UCLA and the Pew poll that has come out on millennials. And they generally indicate that overwhelming support among millennials for strong measures to address climate change, for issues on racial equality, and things that would indicate very liberal points of view. But there probably needs to be a lot more on this age group.
What kind of life experiences? I mean, obviously, they're going to read the news just like any of us, but what kind of life experiences are shaping young people's political views?
Well, we're seeing a great deal more integration racially in this generation, a lot more interracial dating, a lot more interracial associations, more naming of friends of different races and lifestyles. Very common now for high school students to have gay friends. And this really wasn't true when I was growing up. I'm sure we had gay friends, but we didn't know they were gay back in the 60s and 70s. But now things are much more open. And I know this runs contrary to what a lot of people think, that there's all kinds of bullying and things like this. And there certainly is a minority that for which that occurs. But we're seeing much more open kinds of interactions between people from different backgrounds today than we saw in the past. I think those life experiences are very important, but, you know, it's a little hard for me to speak to them because it's more like young people themselves could better describe them than I could. But certainly we're seeing I think, a lot more tolerant attitudes coming out of greater associations. At least I hope that's the case.
Mm-hmm. What are the issues that distinguish younger people from their elders?
The big one seems to be, in two areas. One is climate change. We're seeing a lot of activism among young people around climate change globally. And really, this is pretty intense activity that we're seeing all over all over the planet as far as younger people becoming engaged with this issue. And it's obvious why they would be interested, and that is it's their future we're talking about here. And we've even seen some legal action and some political action and certainly a lot of street-type demonstrations and things like that. They know this is their future that we're gambling with. And older people are not going to live with the decisions that we make on climate change. We're not going to be the ones to suffer for bad decisions that we're making today, and we're certainly making bad ones, at least in the United States. So that's one area where there's been a lot of youth activism. Another area we've seen in gun issues, those have tended to follow more traditional adult solutions, such as background checks and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we're not seeing innovative approaches by younger people. We're just seeing more activism on the gun issue. And the third area where I think we're seeing very big gaps between young and old is in lifestyle issues such as gay rights, gay marriage. You will find there was an interesting poll, I think, about 3 years ago that showed even in the most conservative state in the country on gay rights, Alabama, young people are more liberal than older people in the most liberal state, which is Massachusetts. So there are big gaps opening up on those areas as well. And we also see some gaps in areas such as government, proactivity of government. Younger people tend to want government to be more proactive in helping people in areas like healthcare and social insurance and things like that, and also in environmental protection than older people. So there are some very large gaps that are opening up between younger and older. In some cases, these are larger than gender gaps. They're not larger than racial gaps. You still see between, say, African Americans and whites, larger gaps than you see between young and old. But the generation gap is now bigger than the gender gap on a lot of issues. And we certainly see this in voting as well. But since younger people under 18 can't vote, we really don't know how they would vote. But if we look at millennials in the 18 to 29 category, there are 20, 25, 30-point gaps between their voting and that of older people.
Wow. We're speaking with Mike Males, American sociologist, senior researcher for the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice San Francisco, content director for youthfacts.org, and recently wrote a piece titled "A Lower Voting Age Isn't Just About Politics." That's for Yes Magazine. Going back to the title of your article, Mike, this isn't just about politics. What do young people have to offer public life other than their vote?
Well, I think actually you would expect Democrats to rally around lowering the voting age to 16. And certainly when the amendment was introduced in the House by Representative Presley of Massachusetts to lower the voting age to 16, 125 Democrats voted for it and just one Republican. Brave soul, guy from Texas. And 108 Democrats voted against it, and all Republicans except that one voted against it. So it's a very partisan issue. But in a lot of ways, progressives and Democrats support for lowering the voting age for political reasons. That's really the worst reason to do it. Certainly it would benefit Democrats, at least the best we can tell, in most elections at present. In fact, had 16 and 17-year-olds been able to vote, it's very likely Hillary Clinton would be president, and we would have a solidly Democratic House and probably a Democratic Senate, just from the addition of several million voters of high school age. But that, as I said, is the really partisan politics is the worst reason to lower the voting age. The most important thing is, I think a lot of the problems here, and we haven't really talked about this much in political discussions, a lot of the problems that we're having in Western democracies, in the United States being the leading example, but also the United Kingdom and several other countries, is the aging of the population. We old people, I'm 68 years old, are good for a lot of things. We know more about traditional values. We have more life experience spanning years, and that can be an asset for traditional societies in which carrying over wisdom from past cultures is very important. But when you get to a rapidly changing society, older people have a lot of trouble adapting. And a lot of the frozen nature, the polarized nature of our politics today relates to the fact that we have aging populations that on both sides of the issue, and really I blame one side more than the other, but we won't get into partisan politics right now, are having some real difficulties coming to any kind of compromise. Their attitudes have been hardened over many years. They're baked in, as is the favorite phrase, and they're very hard to change. Younger people, on the other hand, and I'm not saying, again, this is 100% either way. You have old people that think, very flexibly, and you have young people that think very rigidly. But as a general matter, younger generations are much better adapted. They have more flexible thinking, more ability to change with the times, more tolerance for diversity and diverse lifestyles. And again, this is a general rule. And they bring to the table what I think are some qualities that are essential to the survival of our society. And that is the ability to change, the ability to adapt, the familiarity with modern technology, the lack of fear of change and the lack of fear of modern technology that are very important, and also global interconnections. We really saw this in the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom, and a lot of the voting in the United States is that younger people tend to think more internationally. A lot of the impetus for the 16 and 17 voting age that in Scotland, that's been implemented in Scotland and proposed for the United Kingdom, is that older people are making some bad decisions that very much affect younger people. And younger people have a right to participate in decision making. And we're also leaving behind gigantic debts for young people, not just student loan debts, which are bad enough, $1.5 trillion in student loan debts that we're leaving primarily to younger students, that baby boomers and Gen Xers, for the most part, did not have this level of debts, but we're perfectly willing to shovel it off on younger people today. But also debt for just day-to-day stuff that we don't want to pay for. We've seen kind of a transition around the year 2000 from traditional investments being the main cause of death, bonded indebtedness being the main cause of debt, and now toward day-to-day expenses, we're just putting it on the credit card and letting our kids grapple with paying for it. So younger people really have, I think, an absolute right to participate in these decisions that are affecting their lives so much.
It's interesting. It's yet another group marginalized in our voting system in this country. Now, so you bring up the issue of lowering the voting age to 16, or maybe even 14. But how do you make the case? How do you turn this from just being a one-sided argument?
Well, I think it's going to be a one-sided argument as long as it's partisan. And Republicans are very well aware that younger people are probably going to vote, in fact, almost definitely going to vote heavily for Democrats and for liberal issues. And so, if we ever had in this society any consensus on who should vote, and probably we have for brief periods, that voting should be kind of a universal thing, that it should be respected for all groups that are affected by decisions and have the ability to make decisions on them. If we look at voting that way, well, of course, I think it would not be a partisan issue, but I don't see any hope for getting more conservative groups beyond a very few individuals to support lowering the voting age. This is going to have to come from progressives and fairly united progressives. And right now we see Democrats split. As I mentioned, in the House, you had 125 Democrats vote to lower the voting age and 108 vote against it. So with those kind of margins, we're not going to get the voting age lowered anytime soon on a national level. It would have to be a local thing. And in San Francisco, where it was tried, liberal ballot issues in San Francisco, as everyone knows, San Francisco is an extremely liberal city, passed with 75, 80, 85% of the vote. But the voting age actually lost, lowering the voting age to 16 actually lost in 2016 by a margin of 48 to 52%. It was close, but it was still running 30, 40 points behind other liberal ballot issues. And that's because a substantial number of progressives remain to be convinced. And if they can be convinced, not just by partisan self-interest, you really have to again, see that as one of the worst reasons to lower the voting age, just because Democrats would benefit. Of course, that could be seen as progressive pushback against conservative efforts to restrict voting, but also because it really improves society's adaptability. It's essential to our survival to get younger people more involved in decisions that affect them, and that's the way I want progressives to start looking at this. Yes, it will benefit liberal causes, but it will also be essential to at least making some steps toward breaking the logjam that we now see in politics and moving toward more future-oriented and more global-oriented thinking.
It also gives a young kid a little bit more responsibility and something more to really care about that I think would be extremely important and perhaps even make them mature a little bit more quickly. So let's say if you were to advise a political candidate, what would you suggest as ways to effectively connect to young voters?
Well, first of all, the obvious thing, and it's what I'm advised when I talk to high school and middle school groups, is don't talk down to them. Address the issues the same way you would to adult constituencies. Younger people are perfectly capable of understanding complex issues. And as you mentioned, if they have actual responsibility, that always improves your incentive to learn about issues and to inform yourself, is if you have that responsibility. In San Francisco, we saw a very encouraging movement of middle school and high school students on the voting age. They had 75 show up for the Board of Supervisors hearing on the issue, which is unheard of to have that many people show up. And their testimony was articulate. It was impressive. It was varied. It addressed a wide variety of issues, including specific issues that were coming up in San Francisco that they wanted to vote on. And I think it was a very impressive and also some rather interesting philosophical issues. A lot of where I get some of my arguments came out of that hearing before the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco in March 2016, before it went on the November ballot. And I think that movement was very encouraging. And also the reaction of the school system in San Francisco, that civic education was now going to be retooled into a much more practical, what are the responsibilities of voting? What do you have to understand to be a good citizen? And away from just the traditional civics emphasis and toward a more, this is practical. You're going to be using this power while you're in high school. We will have polling places in high schools where 16 and 17-year-olds can vote. And so it becomes a much more practical, immediate issue for them. And that really does sharpen the focus for a lot of people like it does for adults.
Now, for those of us who are not politicians, is it the same approach? You still want to engage with young people in political dialogue? I mean, do you go about it that same way? It's just a matter of not talking down to them, or do you need to change things a little bit to get them more interested in it, given the fact that they're not allowed to vote?
Well, yes. And one of the things that really, to me, it makes the case, a lot of opponents of lowering the voting age make the case for lowering it. One of the things that I hear about a lot, and you will see in commentaries, and in Oregon where they have a proposal to lower the voting age to 16, that's going to be brought up by some legislators there. They point out that they always hear this argument, well, how can you let people vote? How can you let teenagers vote? They eat Tide Pods, or they do these stupid things. That really shows the limitation of the adult thinking, or the person who is objecting to lowering the voting age, and how quickly they stereotype from very few cases. And by the way, there are a lot of adult cases of poisoning from Tide Pods. I'm talking about those laundry detergent pods that look like they're edible, and senior citizens and very young children have often eaten them by mistake, and adults and teenagers have eaten them as well. But these are very, very rare behaviors, and you could use very rare behaviors to object to any group voting. Certainly those kind of things were brought up to oppose the right of women to vote back in the early 20th century, when the issue of suffrage, women's suffrage, was brought up. These same kind of arguments were brought up, these same kind of stereotypes that they don't have the brains to be able to handle this, that women are not out in the world the way men are, that women don't pay taxes, that women don't own property, that women can't do these things and can't do, and can't understand these things. And if we deny rights to women in one area, then we have to deny them the right to vote. All those arguments came up and were fortunately rejected, and women got the right to vote in 1918. And today, these same kinds of prejudicial, one case on CNN is a reason to stereotype an entire group, or these homilies about teenagers not being able to understand anything, or having brains that don't work properly, or all of these things that have been pretty well discredited by actual scientific investigation, keep getting raised as objections to lowering the voting age. So I would think the first thing we have to do, and we've all got our prejudices, is to put them aside and deal with young people as individuals, as individuals who are capable of understanding what they need to understand to be able to be good citizens. A lot of them are engaging in more activism than we've seen previous generations. They're engaging more political issues. They're certainly dealing in more tolerant ways than older adults with the changes in society, as a generation. And so I would think that the best thing politicians and adults in general can do is put aside the prejudices and treat them as individuals.
I think you make a great argument, and although it's a long uphill battle for it, perhaps we can at least chip away and get some advancements on this. Mike Males, Senior Researcher for the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice San Francisco, Content Director for YouthFacts.org, joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast. Mike, thank you so much for your time. We do look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Thank you. I'll be glad to come back.
Fantastic. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Caroline Fredrickson on her new book, The Democracy Fix: How to Win the Fight for Fair Rules, Fair Courts, and Fair Elections.
Joining us now in studio, the president of the American Constitution Society and author of a new book, just out this week, The Democracy Fix, Caroline Fredrickson. Hi, Caroline. Nice to see you. So one assumes by the title of the book that you believe our democracy is broken?
Yes. Yes, it certainly is. It's been significantly damaged.
In what ways?
Well, look, I mean, we know that in the last election, the last presidential election, number one, you had one candidate who won the popular vote who didn't become president, and the other one who lost the popular vote who did. So we have some real issues with democracy there.
Second time in this young century.
Exactly. We had incredible numbers of incidents of voter suppression. Stacey Abrams, who should be governor of Georgia now, clearly documented voter suppression. It's not just in Georgia. It's been across the country. And we have a system where our court system has decided to embrace the efforts of plutocrats to allow them to control government. They, issuing decisions like Citizens United, which flooded our campaigns with money. Shelby County, which destroyed the Voting Rights Act. I think these are really significant issues that we on the left, we progressives need to wrestle with. As important as the policy matters that we debate about health care and the environment, which we can continue to debate, we actually have to really focus on the fundamentals of democracy.
And does all of this result in fewer people feeling that they have a voice and therefore fewer people turning out to vote?
Absolutely. It's the combination of voter suppression, the efforts to shut down early voting, to dissuade people from voting in a variety of ways, make it hard to register. That, coupled with the fact that people with lots of money have much more say in the system, makes people think, why should I bother with all that effort? Because my vote counts for so little. And we need to counter both of those things, right? We need to make the system work for people so that they can show up and vote. And then we need to make them understand that their vote actually counts.
Yeah. So let's talk about each of those areas because, I mean, they're all important, as you say, and they all contribute to the mess that we're in today, if you will. On the money front, we used to talk a lot more about the influence of money in politics. That influence is still there. It just doesn't seem. I mean, there was a big movement to overturn the
Citizens United.
Citizens United, say either by constitutional amendment or in the legislature. But don't hear much talk about it anymore. Well, actually, it's
still ongoing, and I would say, I was very heartened by.
It's still a problem.
It's still a problem. It's still a huge problem. The Supreme Court has made it harder to address significantly. But H.R. 1, which is the first bill that the Democrats in the House introduced, did have a big section on money in politics. And, there are things we can still do, even though the Supreme Court has issued these very wrong-headed decisions. We'll get to that if we talk about the courts and how we reverse that. But, transparency is a really important part, right? Who are the donors behind the attack ads, the dark money that should be disclosed? You can fix that by having the Disclose Act could be passed, which is part of H.R. 1. And as well as fixing the C4 rules in the tax code, which President Obama thought about and, never really pursued. But that is a significant one. C4s have completely violated what their requirements are, not to become political organizations.
Right. So these are organizations that supposedly just do educational work.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Well, they're only supposed to do a minority of their work that's political.
And they can hide their donors, correct?
Exactly. So their donors are hidden. And so you have these kind of black box inside a black box inside a black box. And you were talking about Kavanaugh earlier, which I was happy to hear, an important show like yours discussing the courts. But behind all of those efforts supporting Kavanaugh and attacking those who might have wanted a hearing for Merrick Garland, there were a couple Republicans who thought that Merrick Garland deserved a hearing like every other Supreme Court nominee has always had. The Judicial Crisis Network is a black box organization funded by shadowy donors. It's part of the empire run by Leonard Leo, who's been in charge of Donald Trump's list of judicial nominees. He's an impresario of dark magic. He has all these groups and they run attack ads, and we don't really know who's funding them. But I think the American people really need to know. And part of the disclosure, it's not good enough, right? We actually want to be able to limit money in politics. But to the extent that people know, Koch Brothers Inc. is running an ad in favor of Donald Trump, they can better evaluate whether Koch Brothers Inc. is who they want deciding who the president is, instead of the name that they'd have now, which is, Americans for a Better Future or, a cleaner economy. And then, they really know that they promote oil and gas pollution.
Okay, so money in politics is definitely one area, right, where we need a fix. Gerrymandering. Did you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. So gerrymandering, and I love to, I hate to give this example, but it's an important illustration. So, Karl Rove led this effort.
Red Map,
right. So he was brilliant. He didn't hide it, right? He advertised it. He wrote about it in the Wall Street Journal. Democrats didn't pay too much attention. He basically said all we need really to control Congress is to flip a few state houses. We're going to look at these few state houses that are close, where there's a Republican governor. And then we can totally gerrymander the heck out of these states. And that was in 2010. So 2008, 9, he kind of announced it. He raised his money. He didn't have to raise that much money. Targeted about, $5 or so.
It's about $25 million, as I recall.
Yeah, it really wasn't very much. And it was very precision focused. And they addressed like those couple state Senate seats in Pennsylvania they needed, and the few state house seats in Ohio. And they flipped those state houses so that they were under Republican control. They had a Republican governor, and then they gerrymandered them such that Democrats could never win the proportion of seats that they had in terms of the electorate.
And we're still paying the price today.
Right. So North Carolina, 2018, people thought, oh, that's it was a blue wave. Democrats really turned out. Well, in North Carolina, it was a pretty evenly split vote. Democrats got almost 49% and Republicans got about 51%. There are 13 seats in North Carolina. We'll see. 9 of them at least, but 10 most likely went to the Republicans. I say that because there's another issue of Republican dirty dealing with the stealing of absentee ballots. That's still ongoing. But so just to say they won 10 out of 13 with 51% of the vote. That's what Karl Rove engineered, and for North Carolina to actually have the number of seats where you'd say third, so Democrats should get 6, they'd have to win, an extra 13-14% of the vote.
So what's the answer?
Well, I think the best answer is nonpartisan redistricting. Mm-hmm. I think
which several states have done.
California has done it, and it has turned out really well. There are a number of other states that have done it through ballot initiative. Colorado is moving in that direction, Michigan. And I think that's really important. So where it can be done through ballot initiative, where it can't be done through ballot initiative, which is a number of the states, then I think it's, look, I'm from a nonpartisan group, but I really believe in fair districts. I think to the extent that, there has to be an effort to embrace a partisan approach, that's going to be the Democrats. And, getting them in control of the state houses, but then not letting them just gerrymander in reverse, because I think that is the easiest thing for a Republican Party to undo when they come back into power. But instead, pressuring them for real democratic reforms so that the districts can reflect the will of the voters.
Yeah, otherwise, and I've been involved in a lot of redistricting in the California legislature. Otherwise, you just get leadership changes, and then they're still drawing crooked lines or unfair
I just
lines,
don't think we
one way or the other.
Can trust the Democrats in that regard. I mean, they're going to be very self-interested. So my district, and I might protect my district at the expense of a broader protection for what the voters want in my state.
Right.
And we've seen that many times in the past. So I think, really for small d democracy, we need to pressure Democrats to support a nonpartisan process.
Okay. So we're talking about campaign finance. We're talking about voter suppression. Talked about redistricting, the courts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if there's one branch that seems to be really out of control, it's almost. I mean, look at Mitch McConnell with his rubber stamp.
Exactly.
And even with Democrats in control of the House, it doesn't impact what the Senate's able to do with just stacking the federal courts with the most conservative people ever nominated to the courts.
It's been really disastrous.
I mean, some of them are so unqualified that they've had to even take their names out, right? Even the Republicans could not support them. That's
there was
how bad
only
they
a
are.
couple of them who had to pull their names out. Others should have, because they were also unqualified, but the Republicans didn't balk at those people. So this is an area where I just think the Democrats have fallen down, and the left generally has not engaged. We've seen President Obama, his first 2 years, he had the Senate and didn't really bother. And they seem to think that they couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. They're working on the Affordable Care Act. They couldn't bother to fill the federal judiciary. Well, guess what happens? You pass the Affordable Care Act, and the judges, who are all the holdovers from Republican presidents, strike it down. And, that there was a huge number of vacancies that was left at the end of President Obama's presidency, in part because he moved slowly, in part because, Mitch McConnell is, obstructionist in chief. But what he knew was that, they would focus like a laser beam, and that, if there was anything that Trump did and would do, it was to get them names, because they just outsourced it to the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, and they had their list. And they nominated those people, and they moved them through the process, and all the Republicans got behind, and there was no delay. And, for a lot of people on the right, when you wonder, like, how could the religious right have gotten behind somebody like Donald Trump with all of his adultery, philandering, porn stars?
Now, wait a minute. He celebrated National Prayer Day last night.
Yes, I know. He's a good Christian when he's not groping women. But, that was a bargain. Right? That was the bargain that they struck. It's like, you give us our judges, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. No, total. And he has, right? He's delivered on that front.
He has absolutely.
The one thing you've got to say about Republicans, when they get power, right, they use it.
Right. Well, and that's
There's
the
no
thesis of my book.
back. Is that
That's
right?
exactly the
Good.
thesis of my book, which is power before policy. On the right, over the long term, they have focused on building infrastructure to gain and keep power. And that's building those think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, making sure that they have a pipeline of judicial nominees, as well as a doctrine to apply that conveniently always turns out conservative outcomes, that they have a mechanism to control elections, and that they also control the media, right? They have their own media infrastructure, and they have a media so-called monitoring, where they attack mainstream media, as fake news, and they flood the airwaves with their lies and misleading allegations. And so they basically looked at the different areas of how they can influence and hold on to power for the long term. And then we can get into policy. I think on the left, we need to do the same thing, right? How do we get power? And then how do we write rules that will keep the left and keep progressives and keep democracy in power for the long term?
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the media. A few years ago, I wrote a book about that called Toxic Talk. And if you look at, they were very brilliant. There was this Lewis Powell
yes.
memo. And one of the things he suggested to Richard Nixon was we've got to control the media. So they went out and they bought radio stations and they created networks and they hired talent and they trained their talent. And that's still true today.
Well, I write about that in the book. It's just it's a long history.
Dominate the public airwaves.
And I think one of the things that is really interesting that people don't remember, but maybe is worth reflecting on now, is that Lewis Powell, before he became a Supreme Court justice, he was a tobacco lawyer, but he was also he served on the various committees for the Chamber of Commerce. He was very active. He wrote this memo about how
at the request of Richard Nixon.
Yeah, how do we change the landscape for the long term for the right.
Right.
And
power.
Yes, it was all about power. And so he laid out the court system, think tanks, and basically so-called idea generation, but they're very outcome-oriented ideas.
Like Heritage,
exactly.
Cato, they all came out of that, and right-wing talk radio, ALEC and Rush Limbaugh, the whole thing. It really stems from that Lewis Powell memo.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just people should go and read it. You can find it if you just Google it. Go online. But it's just it's about 40 pages, but it's visionary.
All right. So why isn't there something like that on the left?
Well, that's what I've tried to do with my book.
With a book. That's the book. That's it. There it is. Yeah, The Democracy Fix. But so this just came out. Right?
Yes, it just came out.
Why have progressives or liberals been so slow to really join the battle here?
Well, I think there are a couple reasons.
They haven't been on the playing field.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, one reason, and I'll start with the maybe the defensive reason that is that we're much more diverse and diffuse, right? The left is a bigger tent. So by definition, it's a little bit harder, somewhat harder, to get the cohesiveness that happened on the right. Look, this was an effort that was led by the Chamber of Commerce and big corporations. And then they made a deal with the evangelical right and the moral majority and did this kind of bringing along kind of white working class folks that they appealed to on the basis of racism and social anxieties, and got them to buy into, or basically got them to vote for people who then passed economic plans that were completely against those people's interests. But that's, it's very interesting, and I write about that some in the book, kind of how those forces came together and made this deal. So on the left, we're have a bit of harder task, but on the other hand, I think we also are just not taking it seriously enough. So for the courts, you would think that we're the lawyers, right? That we're the ones who apparently fight in the courts more, and but we don't actually care about the judges or the doctrine in the same way. Whereas they have thought, okay, we need to get those people who are going to issue the decisions that are going to be beneficial to large corporations and plutocrats. And in order to justify those decisions, we need to produce some kind of legal doctrine that's going to justify it, right? So along comes originalism, textualism, and they use that terminology no matter sort of how they apply it, but just so long as it gives them an outcome that's going to drive the law in a conservative direction, and we haven't engaged in the same way.
No, I think you're right. I mean, that's why, in a sense, why we're Democrats. People, more diverse, more fair, more willing to listen, to open to other ideas. But in the end, the Republicans are the ones, again, when they get power. Look at it. Keep thinking of George Bush. Those massive tax cuts, which really just popped up our deficit and really hurt a lot of the middle class. But George Bush pushed those through in the first 2 months of his presidency.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you didn't see Barack Obama get the power and move the progressive agenda.
So here's a good example of the differential kind of hardball on the right and the left. So Bush moved his tax bill through on reconciliation, and reconciliation is a process in Congress where you have expedited consideration and no filibuster in the Senate.
51 votes.
51 votes. And he went right to it. He just didn't bother with trying to use usual process.
Shamelessly.
So, the Affordable Care Act. Barack Obama resisted, and spent a whole year trying to negotiate with Republicans, who even though Mitch McConnell announced at the beginning of Barack Obama's presidency, we're going to try and make him a one-term president, and we're not going to give him any victories.
Right.
And so it was basically a failed effort from the start, and they wasted a whole year. And then he eventually was forced to use reconciliation anyway. But in the meantime, the whole Tea Party had grown up. They had been pressuring Democrats. Then they watered the bill down significantly because Joe Lieberman, wanted X, Y, and Z. And you could see it's that kind of engagement.
So Obama had this vision of wanting to be the first post-partisan president, which was just a total pipe dream and impossible. But enough of that. I want to ask you about, because as head of the American Constitution Society, it seems to me, I want to get your take on it, that we are headed to a real constitutional crisis when Democrats now have control of the House. They want to do their work on oversight. And Donald Trump has said, no way, no how. We're not going to cooperate. We're not going to send any documents, any financial records. No witnesses are going to testify. It really is kind of a clash of the titans here, isn't it?
It's absolutely a clash of the titans. And this is, where you talked about the Attorney General earlier.
Yeah.
This is the sort of the Federalist Society and Heritage Foundation, so-called legal theory of unitary executive. The president is all powerful above the law. And doesn't have to submit to this kind of oversight. And this is one of the reasons Kavanaugh was picked. You remember he argued that a president doesn't have to submit to a subpoena. So I think,
and that's Bill Barr too.
Exactly. That's the Attorney General, unitary executive. And he auditioned for the job, writing that 18-page memo where he said, you can't commit obstruction because you're the president. President, by definition, can't commit obstruction. So I think, the question is where do we go? Right. I think, Jerry Nadler's going to issue that subpoena. Barr is going to resist. And, sort of question is what's next? I mean, I do think that it is really important to get the underlying evidence out to the public. And so they need to start calling in the other witnesses who may be, easier to get to come in, who may be more worried about facing, contempt. But there aren't great avenues to enforce subpoenas.
Starting with Robert Mueller.
Yeah. Absolutely starting. Right. And there's the banks, the insurance companies, and the others.
Caroline Fredrickson with us, head of the American Constitution Society. The book, available wherever you buy good books, is The Democracy Fix. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks for writing.
Thanks so
for
much.
Coming in, too.
It's been a pleasure.
That's all for the America's Democrats podcast. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Dan Vicuna, Mike Males, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. For the America's Democrats podcast, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.